I never thought a summer could upend a lifetime's worth of predictability. And yet, here I am, in a place I once found solace, this quiet lakeside home, where the nights now echo with a tension I can't seem to shake. When Richard and I decided to host my nephew and his friends, it seemed an easy decision. A few weeks to enjoy family, some laughter to fill the rooms that often lay still and empty. But as I stand here tonight, alone with my thoughts and a choice that's already been made, I'm reminded of how swiftly life can twist into something unrecognizable. That evening, I had just settled into the bathtub, letting the lavender-scented water calm my senses, when I heard footsteps behind me. Richard had been gone for a few days on business, so when I heard the door creak, my first thought was that he had come home early. A sense of warmth rose in me, the kind you feel when your partner of 30 years sneaks up on you, still thinking he can surprise you. I didn't look back immediately. I liked the idea of him standing there waiting for me to turn, a silent, familiar dance we'd done countless times. But when I finally turned my head, the figure I saw was not my husband. It was Jonah, my nephew's quiet friend, with eyes dark and intense, watching me in a way that Richard hadn't in years. I felt my heart stutter in that instant, a betrayal I hadn't prepared for, a strange, electric thrill that ran down my spine. For a long second, neither of us moved. I wrapped a towel around myself, my voice catching as I stumbled over my words. He stood there, an apology barely forming on his lips, but his gaze didn't waver. And I, caught in a moment I should have dismissed, couldn't seem to break away. In that single heartbeat, everything changed. The lake house sat on the edge of New Hampshire's secluded woods, nestled under a canopy of old trees that whispered through the breeze. In the summers, the house seemed to breathe with life, filled with visitors or family members looking to unwind from city life. This summer, it was my nephew Declan and two of his friends. My husband Richard had encouraged it, suggesting the boys would stir things up a bit. Give me some company while he was away consulting for a financial merger that seemed to have swallowed up most of his time for months now. Enjoy the company, he had said with his usual smile, which lately I'd come to recognize more as politeness than affection. I had just turned 65, a psychologist who had semi-retired only the year before. The transition had been unsettling, almost as if I'd cut off my identity at its core. Working had been my stability, a rhythm that pulsed through my life and connected me to the world outside my own thoughts. I loved Richard in my way, appreciated him. But as his hours increased and my own identity faded, it had become impossible to ignore the divide forming between us. That's when I noticed Declan's friend, Jonah. He was 24, slight and wiry, with a quiet intensity that struck me the moment he walked through the door. I remember watching him as he surveyed the house on the day he arrived, his eyes traveling along the rooms and taking in each detail, as though absorbing the surroundings through some deeper sense. His presence was a contrast to Declan's other friend, Gabe, who was tall, confident, and always the first to make his opinions known. Jonah, though, seemed the sort to absorb things, to linger on small details, and sometimes, I felt, linger on me. It was an overcast evening when it happened. The incident, I mean. Declan and Gabe were at the lake, their laughter and shouts barely carrying to the house through the distant line of trees. Jonah had stayed behind, saying he wasn't much of a swimmer. I had just finished folding some towels, letting myself get lost in the soft quiet of the house when a thought struck me. I'd take a bath. Richard would be away for another week, so the idea of sinking into a hot bath with a novel, letting the warm water relax me, felt like the escape I hadn't realized I needed. I filled the tub, letting the warm scent of lavender oil drift through the room. The quiet was a comfort as I settled in, leaning my head back against the cool porcelain edge, my mind wandering in the silence. I thought about Richard, about our life here, how it had slowly become routine, a series of unspoken agreements and respectful silences. But lately, respect wasn't quite enough. I craved something. Attention, perhaps. Or just the feeling of being seen again. Somewhere in my thoughts, I heard the door creak open. I assumed it was Richard. The house was old, with creaky doors that often gave away the presence of others. Even though I knew he wasn't due back, the familiarity of the sound made me think of him. Richard had come into the bathroom like this many times before, surprising me with a light touch on the shoulder or a whispered comment meant just for me. I kept my eyes closed, listening as the footsteps padded closer, soft on the old wooden floor. Richard, I thought to myself, feeling a strange thrill of anticipation. I had missed him after all, missed the way he could sometimes break through the routine with a touch that felt intimate. The footsteps grew closer, and I waited, feeling the warmth of the bathroom, the humid air wrapping around me. I anticipated his touch, the feel of his hand on my shoulder. But instead there was silence. After a few moments I felt the quiet settle in, growing heavy. Curiosity flickered in me. I slowly opened my eyes and found myself staring into the reflection across the room, catching a shadowed figure just beyond the bathroom door. It wasn't Richard. Standing there, in the soft glow of the bathroom light, was Jonah. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My pulse quickened, and I felt an unexpected thrill. A surge of confusion mixed with something sharper, something unsettling. Jonah's face was unreadable. His gaze fixed on me, with an intensity that felt too close, too familiar. I felt the color rise to my cheeks, and before I could speak, he turned, muttering a low apology and disappearing down the hallway. As the door closed, I was left alone, my heart racing and an echo of his gaze lingering in the humid air. That night, I replayed the moment over and over in my mind. I could dismiss it, tell myself it was a simple mistake, an innocent mix-up in a house full of people. But the intensity in his gaze, the way he lingered before leaving, that was harder to ignore. And what unsettled me more was my reaction, a thrill that pulsed through me, sharper than I'd felt in years. It was as if I had glimpsed something about myself, something buried, hidden, and now awakened by the simplest, smallest of gestures. I didn't tell Richard about the incident, nor did I mention it to Declan or the others. I chose instead to treat it as a strange, isolated moment, something that would fade with time. And yet, each time I saw Jonah over the next few days, I felt a tension between us, a silent understanding that neither of us dared acknowledge, but both felt, woven into each glance, each silence that stretched too long. He would find me alone sometimes, in the quiet hours when the others were gone, and we would talk about everything but the obvious. He'd ask me about my work, about what it was like to guide people through their lives. I found myself confiding in him about things I'd never admitted to anyone, about the strain of marriage, the loneliness that had crept in like a quiet shadow over the years. He listened, his gaze steady, a softness in his eyes that unsettled me as much as it comforted me. And then one evening, while the others were out late, he stayed behind again. The power had flickered out with a summer storm, casting the house in darkness. I was lighting candles in the living room when he appeared, his figure shadowed, the flicker of candlelight catching his eyes as he watched me. For a moment, we stood in silence, the darkness between us like a thread ready to snap. Jonah's presence in the dim candlelight unsettled me. The storm outside drummed softly on the windows, a distant murmur that seemed to sync with my pulse. We were alone in a way that felt more intimate than even the silence in the bathroom had been. And in that quiet, he moved closer, his gaze focused on me with a strange intensity. For a moment, I didn't move. There was a raw vulnerability in his eyes, something I had seen in the therapy rooms I once worked in, when people dared to reveal the darkest, most complex parts of themselves. And though I knew I should have stepped back, should have broken whatever was hovering between us, I couldn't seem to look away. It's strange, Jonah said, his voice barely above a whisper. Being here like this, it feels different. What do you mean? I replied, my voice sounding steadier than I felt. He shrugged, the shadows casting a softness over his face that made him look older, more experienced than his years. It's like time stops here. Like things that don't make sense anywhere else, somehow, do here. I knew what he meant. The lake house, with its quiet isolation, its stillness that almost forced introspection, had that effect on people. Over the years, friends and family who stayed here often admitted feeling something similar, a sense of clarity. Or, as Jonah put it, a freedom from the constraints of reality. Maybe that's why I like it here, I replied, though my heart raced as I said it. He watched me carefully, as if considering something. Do you feel happy here? The question caught me off guard. It was an innocent enough question, but in the candlelight, with his eyes piercing into mine, it felt heavier, almost as if he were asking something deeper, something I wasn't sure I could answer honestly. I don't know, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I think I used to be. But things change. His gaze softened. I know what you mean. For a moment the words hung in the air, stretching the silence between us. I could sense that we were both standing on the edge of something. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, to break the tension, but before I could speak the lights flickered back on, flooding the room with brightness that felt almost harsh after the intimacy of the candlelight. Jonah blinked, stepping back quickly as if waking from a trance. He mumbled something about needing to check on Declan and Gabe, and within seconds, he was gone, leaving me alone in the living room. The echoes of our conversation lingering like a half-forgotten dream. The following days passed with a strange tension that settled over the lake house like a heavy fog. I tried to avoid Jonah as much as possible, sticking to the safe routine of meals and chores, retreating to my room early each night to read. But every time I passed him in the hallway, or heard his laughter from the deck, I felt that pulse of energy return. A reminder of the moment we had shared in the living room. I knew it was wrong to feel this way. Knew that these thoughts were dangerous, reckless even. But no matter how hard I tried to suppress them, they surfaced like ripples on a calm lake, disrupting the stillness I had worked so hard to maintain. And then, one evening, Declan and Gabe announced they'd be heading into town for the night, leaving Jonah and me alone in the lake house. I felt a flicker of unease mixed with excitement as I watched them pull away, their laughter fading into the night. I stayed in the living room, pretending to read, my heart pounding with a nervous anticipation that I couldn't quite explain. As the night wore on, I heard Jonah moving around the kitchen, the quiet clinking of dishes and the soft hum of the refrigerator punctuating the silence. I kept my eyes on the page, willing myself to stay focused, but eventually I heard him approach, his footsteps soft on the carpet. Are you waiting up for them? He asked, his voice breaking the quiet. I looked up, caught off guard by the question. No, just reading, I replied, though the lie felt transparent. And you? Couldn't you go out with them? He smiled, a slight, almost shy smile that made my chest tighten. I'm not really one for crowded places. I like the quiet here. He lingered, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The room felt thick with unspoken words, with things we dared not say. I could feel his gaze on me, steady and unblinking, as though he were waiting for me to make the first move, to acknowledge whatever it was that lay between us. Eventually, I set my book down, my hands trembling slightly. It's late, I said, though my voice betrayed the uncertainty I felt. Right, he replied, but he didn't move. Instead, he took a step closer, his eyes never leaving mine. I felt my heart race, a wild, reckless beat that echoed in the silence between us. I'm sorry, he murmured finally, his voice barely above a whisper. For whatever this is, I don't want to make you uncomfortable. It's not. I stammered. the words tangling in my throat as I searched for an answer, something to ease the tension between us. But as he stepped even closer, I felt my resolve waver, felt the edges of my carefully constructed life blur and dissolve. And then, before I could stop myself, I reached out, my hand brushing against his arm, a touch so soft and fleeting it could have been mistaken for an accident. But in that moment, it felt like a confession, an admission of everything I had tried so hard to ignore. He looked down at my hand, then back up at me, his eyes dark and unreadable. Slowly, he lifted his own hand, placing it gently over mine, his fingers warm and steady against my skin. I felt a shiver run through me, a thrill of something forbidden, something that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. "Elaine," he whispered, his voice low and rough. "Are you sure?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words, the weight of the decision I was about to make. I knew the risks, knew the consequences that would follow, but in that moment, they seemed to pale in comparison to the intensity of the connection I felt, the desire that had been simmering just beneath the surface. "Yes," I whispered back, my voice barely audible. "I'm sure." The rest of the evening was a blur, a hazy memory of whispered words and soft touches that left me feeling both exhilarated and hollow. In the quiet hours that followed, as the dawn broke over the lake and cast a soft light over the house, I felt a heaviness settle over me, a weight that I couldn't quite shake. The thrill of the night before had faded, replaced by a creeping sense of dread, of guilt that clung to me like a shadow. When Declan and Gabe returned, I did my best to act normal, to bury the memory of what had happened. But every time I caught Jonah's gaze, I felt a flicker of that same intensity, a reminder of the night we had shared. It was a secret, a dark, dangerous secret that I carried with me, a constant reminder of the lines I had crossed. Richard returned a few days later, his arrival bringing a strange sense of relief and dread. I threw myself into the familiar routine of our life together, hoping that the weight of the secret I held would fade over time, that the memories of that night would eventually dull. But they didn't. Instead, they lingered, a constant, unspoken presence that haunted me in the quiet moments, in the silence of the night when I was alone with my thoughts. As the days passed, the weight of what had happened with Jonah pressed on me, though I managed to conceal it well. Richard's presence should have been a grounding force, a reminder of stability and routine. But instead, it made the secret seem darker, heavier. There were moments, sitting across from him at the breakfast table, that I had to look away, terrified he might read the guilt in my eyes. Richard was as he'd always been. Polite, warm in his distant way, attentive to a degree. But even he seemed more preoccupied lately, his mind on work, his business calls filling up entire afternoons and spilling into the evenings. As he focused on his world, I began slipping into mine, a shadowed place where memories of that night with Jonah resurfaced over and over, almost taunting me. And then, one evening, just after dinner, Richard brought up something unexpected. "Elaine," he said, folding his hands thoughtfully over his plate. "Have you noticed anything strange about Declan's friend, Jonah?" The question sent a shiver down my spine, my heartbeat quickening as I tried to keep my expression calm. "Strange? How do you mean?" He frowned, glancing over his shoulder as if Jonah might be standing right there. "I don't know. He just seems, out of place somehow. Maybe it's just me. I've seen him watching you a few times, in a way that, well, maybe I'm just being paranoid." The air between us grew tense, thick with unspoken suspicions. My chest tightened, a slow panic rising as I realized how close Richard was to the truth. I forced a laugh, hoping it would disarm him. "He's young, Richard. Young people are always a bit lost, aren't they? Especially these days." I could feel the words leaving my mouth, each one shaky, thinly veiling the anxiety I felt. "And he's probably just curious, that's all." Richard nodded slowly, though his expression remained thoughtful, unconvinced. The conversation lingered in the air long after he dropped it, and as I watched him gather the dishes and head toward the kitchen, I felt a pang of guilt so sharp it almost took my breath away. The days that followed became an exercise in self-restraint. Every time Jonah and I crossed paths, I felt the silent question in his gaze, a reminder of our shared secret that neither of us could ignore. We kept our distance, both aware of the unspoken line between us, but I knew it was only a matter of time before the tension would come to a head. And then, it did. One evening, while Richard was away on a sudden work trip, Jonah approached me on the porch. The lake lay silent beneath the stars, the gentle lapping of water against the shore the only sound in the night. I was standing alone, watching the reflection of the moon ripple across the water, when I felt him approach, his presence quiet but unmistakable. "Elaine," he murmured, his voice low, hesitant. We need to talk." I turned, my heart pounding as I met his gaze, dark and intense in the moonlight. "Jonah, I think it's best if we let things be." He nodded, a flicker of sadness passing over his face. "I know. He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving mine. "I can't stop thinking about you." The admission hung in the air, heavy and unbreakable. My chest tightened, the part of me that had longed for something more, something I hadn't felt in years, stirring to life once again. But I forced myself to stay firm, to hold on to the crumbling remains of my resolve. "Jonah," I whispered, the words catching in my throat. It can't happen again." He looked away, nodding slowly, his shoulders sagging in defeat. "I understand," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I thought you should know." As he turned to leave, I felt a surge of conflicting emotions, guilt, relief, and a pang of something else, something that felt too much like loss. And in that moment, I realized that my life, as carefully constructed as it had been, would never be the same. The days slipped by, each one marked by an unspoken tension that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. I threw myself into the routine of life with Richard, hoping that the familiarity of it would cleanse the memory of Jonah, of that night. But every time I saw Richard's face, every time he reached out to hold my hand or whispered something in my ear, I felt the weight of my secret, heavy and inescapable. Eventually, Declan and his friends left, returning to their lives, and for a brief, fleeting moment, I thought that the silence they left behind would bring peace. But instead, it only amplified the guilt, the sense of emptiness that had settled over me like a shadow. Richard noticed, of course. He was perceptive in his quiet way, and though he never asked directly, I could see the concern in his eyes, the worry that something had shifted between us. And I suppose in a way it had. I was no longer the person I had been before. I had changed, irrevocably, in a way I couldn't quite explain. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, he took my hand, his grip warm and steady. "Elaine," he said quietly, his voice soft in the fading light. "Is everything all right?" I hesitated, my heart pounding as I searched for the right words. I could feel the weight of my secret pressing down on me, the urge to confess, to unburden myself of the guilt that had taken root inside me. But as I looked into his eyes, saw the love and concern etched in his face, I knew that I couldn't. The truth would destroy us both. So instead, I forced a smile, squeezing his hand gently. "Yes," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. "Everything is fine." And in that moment, I realized that the person I had once been, the person who had lived a life of honesty and integrity, was gone. I had crossed a line, one that could never be uncrossed, and in its place was a truth that I would carry alone, a secret that would remain hidden, buried in the depths of my memory. As the darkness settled over the lake, I felt a strange sense of peace, a bittersweet acceptance of the choices I had made. Life would go on, as it always did, but I knew that I would never forget that summer, the summer that had changed everything. And as I sat there, hand in hand with the man I had spent my life with, I felt the weight of my choices, heavy and unyielding. A reminder of the price we pay for the things we dare not speak. I didn't think twice about stepping into the living room that night. It was late, and I'd only gotten up to grab a glass of water. I wasn't expecting anyone to be awake. Not my husband, Marcus, who was on another business trip, or Adrian, my stepson, who usually stayed holed up in his room until noon. So when I saw him sitting on the couch, I froze. Not because he startled me, but because of the way he was looking at me. His eyes locked on me, unblinking, and it took me a moment to realize why. That's when it hit me. My nightgown. It was thin, far too thin, especially under the glow of the dim floor lamp beside him. Sheer fabric clung to my skin, revealing far more than I'd intended. "Adrian," I managed, my voice softer than I'd meant. He didn't answer, his gaze trailing over me in a way that made my stomach twist, not with discomfort, but with something far more dangerous. I clutched the neckline of the gown, suddenly self-conscious, but it was too late. The look in his eyes said everything. I turned quickly, muttering an excuse about needing water, but my hand trembled as I grabbed the glass from the sink. I could feel his presence still in the room, heavy, unspoken. When I finally glanced back, he was still staring, his expression unreadable but intense enough to make me catch my breath. That was the moment, the shift. "I suppose I should tell you who I am, and how I got to this place where a single look from my stepson could unravel me. My name is Evelyn, a name that feels too refined for the mess I've made of my life. I'm 53, the second wife of Marcus Hallworth, a man who's as dependable as he is distant. Marcus has built a career and a reputation on being reliable, but that reliability doesn't extend to his personal life. When I married him 10 years ago, I thought I'd finally found stability after years of struggling as a single mother. My first husband left me with little more than debt and a broken heart, and Marcus offered me something I hadn't had in years: security. But security isn't love, and over time, our marriage became more of a partnership than a romance. Marcus travels often, leaving me alone in the sprawling house filled with expensive furniture, but no warmth. I used to fill the emptiness with hobbies, gardening, painting. But lately, even that feels like going through the motions. I've become a fixture in my own home, a woman who fades into the background, unnoticed. That is, until Adrian came back. He's 24 now, freshly graduated and home for the summer, while he figures out his next steps. I've known him since he was a teenager, polite, quiet, and always a little withdrawn. But the Adrian who came back this summer is different. He carries himself with a quiet confidence, a sharpness in his gaze that wasn't there before. He's grown into himself, and for the first time, I can't help but notice. I tell myself it's harmless, a passing thought. But that night in the living room, when I caught him looking at me like that, something shifted. I went back to bed, lying awake for hours, replaying the scene in my head. The way his gaze lingered, the tension in the air, and the way my own body betrayed me, a heat rising in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. It was just a look, I told myself, a momentary lapse. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. That night marked the beginning of something I couldn't name yet, something I wasn't ready to admit to myself. Because when I woke up the next morning, the memory of Adrian's gaze wasn't something I wanted to forget. It was something I wanted to feel again. The morning after that night in the living room, everything felt sharper. I was hyper-aware of Adrian's presence in a way I hadn't been before. His movements around the house, the way his voice carried when he spoke on the phone, even the faint scent of his cologne that lingered in the hallway. It all felt amplified. I spent the day trying to keep myself busy, scrubbing the kitchen counters and reorganizing the pantry as if cleaning could erase the memory of his stare. But by the time dinner rolled around, I was a wreck. Marcus was still out of town, leaving just Adrian and me to share an awkward meal. I avoided his eyes, focusing on my plate as if the roasted chicken required intense concentration. "You've been quiet today," Adrian said finally, breaking the silence. I glanced up, startled. His tone was casual, but the weight of his gaze wasn't. "Just tired," I said, forcing a smile. "You sure that's all it is?" The question hung in the air, heavy and pointed. I could feel my cheeks flush, and I quickly looked away, pretending to be interested in refilling my water glass. You know, he continued, his voice softer now, about last night? My hand froze mid-pour. What about last night? I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable, he said, leaning back in his chair. It's just, I wasn't expecting to see you like that. My pulse quickened. Adrian, it's fine. Let's just forget about it. Can you? He asked, his voice low, almost daring. I couldn't answer. Instead, I stood abruptly, gathering my plate. I'm going to clean up. I heard his chair scrape against the floor as he stood, following me into the kitchen. Evelyn, he said, his voice closer now. I turned to face him, clutching the plate like a shield. Adrian, stop. He paused, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, stepping back. Okay, I'll stop, for now. The way he said it, soft but certain, sent a shiver down my spine. The days that followed were a delicate balancing act. Adrian didn't push, but he didn't retreat either. He was always there, lingering at the edges of my world, watching, waiting. One evening, a storm rolled in, knocking out the power. Marcus was still in New York, and the house felt cavernous and empty as the rain lashed against the windows. I lit candles in the living room, their warm glow doing little to dispel the tension that had been simmering between Adrian and me. You okay? He asked, stepping into the room. I'm fine, I said, setting a candle on the coffee table. He sat on the couch, his posture relaxed, but his eyes were sharp, tracking my movements. You don't seem fine. I sighed, sitting down across from him. It's just the storm. It makes the house feel lonely. You don't have to be lonely, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. My breath caught, but I forced myself to laugh, brushing off his words. You've been spending too much time reading those dramatic novels. He didn't laugh. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Evelyn, we both know what this is. My heart pounded. What are you talking about? This, he said, gesturing between us. I see the way you look at me, and I know you've noticed the way I look at you. Adrian? I'm not a kid anymore, he interrupted. I'm not some teenager with a crush. I know what I want. His words sent a wave of heat through me, but I shook my head, standing abruptly. This conversation is over. I turned to leave, but his hand shot out, gently grabbing my wrist. The contact was electric, sending a jolt through my entire body. Evelyn, he said softly, his eyes locking onto mine. Don't walk away. For a moment I stood frozen, torn between every instinct screaming at me to leave and the undeniable pull keeping me rooted in place. Please, he murmured, his voice cracking just enough to betray the vulnerability beneath his boldness. That was what undid me. I sat back down, my heart hammering as he let go of my wrist. The air between us was heavy, charged with something I couldn't name. This is dangerous, I whispered. Sometimes danger is worth it. He replied, his voice steady. The first time was tentative, a collision of longing and restraint that neither of us could hold back any longer. It happened in the faint glow of candlelight, the storm outside muffling the sound of our breaths. When it was over, I lay in his arms, staring at the flickering shadows on the ceiling. This can't happen again, I said, my voice trembling. Why not? He asked, his tone calm but firm. Because it's wrong, I said, pulling away. Because Marcus doesn't deserve you, he interrupted, sitting up. He doesn't even see you, Evelyn. But I do. His words sliced through me, and for a moment I couldn't respond. I need time, I said finally, standing and gathering my robe around me. Please, Adrian. He nodded, his gaze intense. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. But time didn't make it easier. If anything, it made it worse. The tension between us grew, spilling into every interaction. A brush of hands in the kitchen. A lingering glance across the dinner table. The way his voice softened whenever he said my name. I tried to keep my distance, but it was impossible. Adrian had become the center of my thoughts, my pulse quickening whenever I heard his footsteps in the hall. And then, one evening, Marcus called. I'll be home tomorrow, he said, his voice brisk. I've been gone too long. The words sent a wave of panic through me. Marcus's presence would shatter the fragile world Adrian and I had built, forcing us back into the roles we were supposed to play. After I hung up, I found Adrian in the garden, his hands buried in the soil as he tended to the flowers I'd planted months ago. He's coming back, I said, my voice shaking. Adrian looked up, his expression unreadable. So what do we do? I don't know, I whispered. He stood, brushing the dirt from his hands as he stepped closer. We don't have to stop, Evelyn. We just have to be careful. Careful? I repeated, my voice rising. Adrian, this is insane. We're going to get caught. Then let's get caught, he said, his tone defiant. I stared at him, stunned. What are you talking about? I'm tired of pretending, he said. I'm tired of hiding. I don't care what anyone thinks. But I do, I said, tears welling in my eyes. I can't lose everything, Adrian. I can't lose you. He cupped my face, his gaze fierce. You're not going to lose me, ever. His words were a promise, but they felt like a warning. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't sleep. Marcus's impending return loomed over me, and Adrian's words echoed in my mind. We don't have to stop. We just have to be careful. But I knew deep down that careful wouldn't be enough. The storm we'd started was already too big to contain, and it was only a matter of time before it consumed us both. Marcus returned the next afternoon, carrying his usual air of authority that filled the house. He greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek, barely looking up from his phone, and gave Adrian a curt nod. It's good to have you back, I said, forcing a smile as I took his suitcase. He glanced at me, his brow furrowing slightly. You look tired. Are you sleeping well? I'm fine, I said, quickly turning away before he could see the flush creeping up my neck. Adrian said nothing, his eyes fixed on Marcus with a calm that betrayed none of the chaos that had consumed us in Marcus's absence. That evening, I found myself standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes while Marcus worked in his office. Adrian came in quietly, his presence like a magnetic pull I couldn't ignore. You're going to break that plate, he said softly, gesturing to the one I was gripping too tightly. I set it down, my hands trembling. You need to stop, I whispered, not daring to look at him. Stop what? He asked, stepping closer. This, the way you look at me, the way you linger, I said, finally turning to face him. Adrian tilted his head, his eyes locked onto mine. Do you want me to stop? My breath hitched. I didn't answer. His hand brushed mine as he reached for a towel, his touch sending a jolt through me. You don't have to keep pretending, Evelyn, not with me. Adrian, we can't keep doing this, I said, my voice trembling. But we are, he said, his voice steady. And we will. I stepped back, putting distance between us as footsteps sounded in the hall. Marcus appeared in the doorway, looking between us with a curious expression. Everything okay in here? He asked, his tone casual but sharp. Fine, I said quickly, my voice too high. Adrian nodded, his face a perfect mask of calm. Just helping with the dishes. Marcus lingered for a moment, his gaze flicking between us, before retreating back to his office. The tension in the house became unbearable in the days that followed. Marcus's presence was a constant reminder of the line Adrian and I had crossed. But it also made every stolen glance and whispered word between us all the more thrilling. One evening, Marcus announced that he'd invited an old friend over for dinner. Philip Caldwell, he said, pouring himself a glass of scotch. You remember him, don't you, Evelyn? I nodded, though the name sent a ripple of unease through me. Philip was an investigator, sharp, shrewd, and far too observant for my liking. When he arrived, his handshake was firm, his smile polite but assessing. As we sat down to dinner, I felt his eyes on me more than once, his gaze lingering just a moment too long. This is quite the house, Philip said, looking around. Marcus always did have a taste for the finer things. Marcus chuckled. Well, it helps to have a wife who knows how to make a house feel like home. I forced a smile, my stomach twisting as Philip's gaze shifted to Adrian. And you, he said, leaning back in his chair. What's your plan, Adrian? Following in your father's footsteps? Adrian shrugged, his tone measured. I'm still figuring things out. Philip's smile didn't reach his eyes. Smart. No need to rush into anything. The rest of the evening passed uneventfully, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Philip was watching me, studying the dynamics of our household with a precision that made my skin crawl. That night, I found Adrian waiting for me in the garden, his figure barely visible in the moonlight. He knows something, I said, wrapping my arms around myself. Philip? Adrian asked, his tone calm. I nodded. I can feel it. The way he looks at us, it's like he's putting pieces together. Let him, Adrian said, stepping closer. He doesn't have anything on us. But what if he finds something? I whispered, my voice trembling. He reached out, his hand brushing against my cheek. Then we'll deal with it, together. The following day things took an unexpected turn. I was in the study, sorting through a stack of mail, when I came across an envelope addressed to me in unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a single piece of paper with a typed message. I know what you've been doing. Meet me at the diner on 5th at 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone. My hands shook as I reread the note. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a name to know who had sent it. Something wrong? Marcus's voice startled me, and I quickly folded the note, slipping it into my pocket. No, nothing, I said, forcing a smile. That evening, I told Marcus I was meeting a friend for coffee. He barely looked up from his laptop as I left, my heart pounding as I made my way to the diner. Lila was waiting for me in a corner booth, her expression smug as I slid into the seat across from her. You've been busy, she said, stirring her coffee. What do you want? I asked, cutting straight to the point. She smiled, leaning back in her chair. Money, of course. Enough to make me forget what I've seen. I clenched my fists under the table. You don't have any proof. Don't I? She said, pulling out her phone. She tapped the screen, and my blood ran cold as I saw a grainy photo of Adrian and me in the garden, his hand on my cheek. Delete it, I said, my voice shaking. Not until I get what I want, she replied. 50,000 by the end of the week. I don't have that kind of money, I said, my mind racing. Then figure it out, she said, standing and slipping her phone back into her purse. Because if you don't, Marcus will be the first to know. When I told Adrian about the meeting, he was furious. She's bluffing, he said, pacing the room. She has photos, I said, my voice trembling. And she's not bluffing, Adrian, she's serious. Then we'll pay her, he said. With what? I asked. I don't have access to that kind of money, and neither do you. His jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. Then we'll find another way. Over the next few days, the tension in the house reached a breaking point. Marcus seemed oblivious, but Philip's presence loomed like a storm cloud. One afternoon, I overheard Philip and Marcus talking in the study. There's something off about Adrian, Philip said. I'd keep an eye on him if I were you. What are you getting at? Marcus asked, his tone wary. Philip hesitated. Just a feeling. Call it professional intuition. That night, Adrian came to my room, his expression grim. We can't keep this up, he said. What do you mean? I asked, my heart sinking. This house, this situation, it's too dangerous, he said. We need to leave. Leave? I repeated, stunned. He nodded. Just you and me. We'll go somewhere far away, start over. Adrian, that's insane, I said. What's insane is staying here, pretending everything's fine when it's not, he said, his voice rising. I shook my head, tears welling in my eyes. I can't just walk away, Adrian. From Marcus, from this life. Do you love him? Adrian interrupted, his tone sharp. I froze. That's what I thought, he said, his voice softening. Evelyn, I love you, and I can't stand the thought of losing you. His words broke something inside me, and I pulled him into an embrace, clinging to him like he was the only thing keeping me afloat. But even as I held him, a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that this wasn't over. The storm was still coming, and when it hit, it would leave nothing unscathed. The following day, everything started to unravel faster than I could contain it. Adrian's plea to leave together echoed in my mind, but no matter how much I wanted to give in, the thought of disappearing felt impossible. Marcus was still oblivious, wrapped up in his work, but Philip's presence lingered like a shadow. And then there was Lila, whose demands were growing louder and more urgent. That morning, as I sat in the kitchen nursing a cup of coffee, Marcus walked in, looking sharper than usual in a tailored navy suit. I'll be out most of the day, he said, scrolling through emails on his phone. What's going on? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. A meeting downtown, he replied, looking up briefly. Philip's coming with me. Something about loose ends he wants to tie up. Loose ends. The phrase sent a chill through me. What kind of loose ends? I asked, my fingers tightening around the mug. Marcus shrugged. Nothing for you to worry about, just business. But as he kissed me on the cheek and walked out the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't telling me the whole truth. By mid-afternoon, my anxiety was spiraling. Adrian was out, probably trying to find a way to deal with Lila, and I was left alone in the house with nothing but my thoughts. I paced the living room, my mind racing with possibilities. And then, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Lila stood there, her arms crossed and her expression smug. You're late, she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. What are you talking about? I asked, my voice trembling. The money, she replied, turning to face me. I told you I wanted it by today. I told you I don't have that kind of money, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Well, that's unfortunate, she said, pulling out her phone. Because Marcus might be very interested in seeing these. She held up the screen, and there it was again, the photo of Adrian and me in the garden, clear enough to erase any doubt about what was happening between us. Lila, please, I said, my voice breaking. You don't have to do this. Oh, but I do, she said, her tone mocking. Unless, of course, you suddenly figure out how to meet my price. Before I could respond, the front door opened, and Adrian walked in. He froze when he saw Lila, his eyes narrowing. What's going on? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. Just having a little chat with your stepmother, Lila said, smirking. Adrian stepped forward, his posture tense. You need to leave. Not until I get what I came for, she said, holding up her phone. Adrian's gaze hardened, and before I could stop him, he snatched the phone from her hand. Hey, Lila shouted, reaching for it, but Adrian held it out of her reach. This ends now, he said, his voice cold. You think that's my only copy? She sneered. Adrian didn't flinch. If you so much as breathe a word of this to anyone, I'll make sure you regret it. Lila's eyes widened for a moment, but she quickly recovered, her smirk returning. Big talk. Let's see if you can back it up. With that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. She's not going to stop, I said, my voice shaking. She will, Adrian said, his tone firm. I'll make sure of it. How? I asked, my chest tightening. Adrian, this isn't something you can just fix. She's a problem, and I'll handle her, he said, his gaze unwavering. His words sent a shiver through me, but before I could press him further, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. It's Marcus, he said. What does he want? I asked, my heart pounding. Adrian hesitated. He says he's on his way home, and he wants to talk. When Marcus arrived, the atmosphere in the house shifted immediately. He walked in with purpose, his expression unreadable as he set his briefcase down in the study. Evelyn, Adrian, he called, his voice calm but commanding. Can you both join me? Adrian and I exchanged a glance before following him. Marcus stood behind his desk, his hands resting on the polished wood surface as he looked between us. Is something wrong? I asked, my voice trembling. I had an interesting conversation with Philip today, he said, his tone measured. My stomach dropped. About what? Marcus's gaze settled on Adrian. About you. Adrian didn't flinch. What about me? Marcus leaned forward slightly. He seems to think there's something unusual about the way you've been acting lately, especially around Evelyn. The room went silent. Marcus? That's ridiculous, I said quickly. Philip's just stirring up trouble. Is he? Marcus asked, his gaze shifting to me. Because I've been noticing things too. The way you two look at each other. The way you avoid being in the same room as me. My breath caught, and I felt Adrian's hand brush against mine, a silent gesture of reassurance. You're imagining things, Adrian said, his voice calm. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Am I? Before anyone could respond, the front door burst open, and Philip walked in, a file folder in his hand. Sorry to interrupt, he said, his tone anything but apologetic, but I thought you might want to see this. He placed the folder on the desk and opened it, revealing a series of documents. Marcus's expression darkened as he scanned the pages. What is this? He asked, his voice cold. Evidence, Philip said. Your wife and your son have been keeping secrets, but so have you. Marcus looked up sharply. What are you talking about? Philip leaned back, a smug smile on his face. Your little side business, the offshore accounts, the money laundering, it's all here. The blood drained from Marcus's face. Where did you get this? I have my sources, Philip said. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The room erupted into chaos. Marcus shouted at Philip, accusing him of betrayal, while Adrian stood protectively in front of me. This is insane, I said, my voice shaking. No, what's insane is what's been happening under my roof, Marcus snapped, turning his fury on me. Did you think I wouldn't find out? About him? About you? I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Marcus. Save it, he said, his voice cold. You've humiliated me. You've ruined this family. That's enough, Adrian said, stepping forward. Marcus turned on him. You think you're some kind of hero? You're nothing but a selfish, arrogant child. That's funny, Adrian said, his voice steady. Coming from a man who's been lying to everyone he's ever known. Marcus's hand clenched into a fist, and for a moment, I thought he might hit him. But before he could, Philip stepped between them. "Gentlemen," he said, his tone sharp. "Let's not make this any uglier than it already is." In the end, Marcus agreed to stay quiet about Adrian and me, but only on one condition. I had to help him cover up his crimes. "You're already implicated," he said, his tone icy. "The accounts are in your name. If I go down, so do you." I had no choice but to agree. But as I sat in my room that night, staring at the ceiling, I knew this was far from over. Adrian came to me, his expression heavy with guilt. "This isn't your fault," he said softly. "Yes, it is," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I should have stopped this before it started." He pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly. "We'll figure it out, I promise." But deep down, I knew that some promises couldn't be kept. The storm we'd unleashed was only beginning, and the consequences would be far more devastating than either of us could imagine. The morning after Marcus's ultimatum, the house felt different, colder, heavier, as if the walls themselves were suffocating me. I could barely meet Adrian's eyes as we moved around each other in the kitchen, the weight of Marcus's threats hanging between us. Marcus left early for a meeting, but not before reminding me, in his cold, clipped tone, of the consequences if I crossed him. "We're tied together now," he said before walking out the door. "Don't forget that." The sound of his car pulling out of the driveway was a relief, but it was short-lived. Adrian cornered me in the hallway not long after, his expression dark and determined. "What did he say to you last night?" Adrian asked, his voice low. I hesitated, knowing how furious he'd be if he knew the truth. "It's nothing we can't handle." "Don't do that," he said sharply. "Don't brush it off. I can see it in your eyes. He's threatening you, isn't he?" I looked away, but he grabbed my wrist gently, forcing me to meet his gaze. "Evelyn, what is he holding over you?" "He wants me to help him cover his tracks," I admitted finally, my voice shaking. "He's using the accounts in my name to keep me quiet. If I don't cooperate, Then we'll expose him first," Adrian interrupted. "It's not that simple," I said, my voice rising. "If he goes down, he'll make sure I go down with him." "Adrian, I'm already implicated in his crimes. He's made sure of it." "Then we'll find a way out," he said firmly. "Together." "How?" I whispered, tears welling in my eyes. He pulled me into his arms, his voice soft but resolute. "We'll figure it out. I'm not letting him ruin you, Evelyn. Not for his mistakes." That evening, I overheard Marcus on the phone in his study. His voice low and urgent. "Philip's getting too close," he said. "We need to handle this quietly. No loose ends." The phrase sent a chill down my spine. I stepped closer to the door, straining to hear. "If it comes to it," Marcus continued, "we may need to cut ties entirely. You know what I mean?" My stomach turned. He wasn't just talking about silencing Philip. He was talking about eliminating him. I found Adrian in the garden later that night, pacing near the edge of the property. I told him everything I'd heard, my voice trembling as I recounted Marcus's words. "He's planning something," I said. "Something dangerous." Adrian's expression darkened. "We need to stop him." "How?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Adrian, he has all the power. He has the money, the connections." "He doesn't have you," Adrian said, his voice firm. "And that's what terrifies him." The next morning everything came to a head. I woke to the sound of raised voices coming from the study. Adrian and Marcus were arguing, their words muffled but heated. My heart raced as I crept closer, staying out of sight. "You're a selfish, reckless bastard," Marcus spat. "You've jeopardized everything I've built." "And you're a liar and a coward," Adrian shot back. "You've been using Evelyn to cover your crimes, and I won't let you drag her down with you." Marcus's voice dropped, cold and menacing. "What are you going to do, Adrian? Run to the police? They'll laugh you out of the station. You're nothing but a spoiled boy who doesn't know his place." "Maybe not," Adrian said, "but I know enough to ruin you." The room went silent and I held my breath, terrified of what would happen next. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice eerily calm. "If you want to ruin me, go ahead. But know this, I'll take Evelyn down with me. Everything she's worked for, everything she's built, it'll all be gone. Do you really want that on your conscience?" I stepped into the room before Adrian could respond, my voice shaking. "Stop it. Both of you." They turned to me, their faces tense and angry. "This has gone too far," I said, my chest tightening. Marcus, if you care about me at all, you'll stop this. Let it go. He laughed bitterly. Care about you? Don't kid yourself, Evelyn. You're just another pawn in this game. Adrian moved toward him, his fists clenched, but I stepped between them, my voice rising. Enough. I won't let you destroy each other. Marcus sneered. You think you can stop this? It's already too late. Later that evening, Adrian and I made a decision. We have to leave, he said, his voice firm. There's no other way. I nodded, my heart heavy. But what about Marcus? He'll come after us. Let him, Adrian said. We'll disappear. He won't be able to touch us. We packed quickly, taking only what we needed. But as we were leaving, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway froze us in our tracks. Marcus stepped out, his face twisted with rage as he marched toward us. Going somewhere? He asked, his voice cold. Let us go, Marcus, I said, my voice trembling. He shook his head, his laughter bitter. You think you can just walk away from this? From me? Adrian stepped forward, his posture tense. We're done, Marcus. You've lost. Have I? Marcus said, his gaze shifting to me. You think he can protect you, Evelyn? He's a boy playing at being a man. He'll abandon you the second things get tough. That's enough, Adrian said, his voice steady. Marcus sneered. You're nothing, Adrian, and she'll see that soon enough. Before Marcus could say more, Adrian grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the car. We're leaving, he said. Marcus didn't stop us. He just stood there, his expression dark and triumphant, as if he'd already won. We drove for hours, the tension between us thick and heavy. I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus wasn't finished, that he'd find a way to drag us back into his web. As we pulled into a quiet motel on the outskirts of a small town, Adrian turned to me, his expression serious. We'll figure this out, he said softly. I nodded, though the weight of everything we'd left behind pressed heavily on my chest. In the end, we weren't free. Not really. Marcus's threat still lingered, a shadow over everything we tried to build. But as Adrian pulled me into his arms that night, whispering promises of a future where we could finally be happy, I let myself believe, if only for a moment, that we could escape the past. And maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to start over, together. The quiet hum of the motel's air conditioner was the only sound that filled the room, as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the cheap floral wallpaper. Adrian stood by the window, peeking through the blinds every few minutes like he expected Marcus to appear at any moment. We can't stay here forever, I said, breaking the silence. I know, Adrian replied, his voice tight. He had been calm during the drive, resolute even, but now I could see the cracks beginning to show. The tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched every time he glanced outside, it was only a matter of time before the weight of everything we'd done caught up with him. We need a plan, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Adrian turned to face me, his expression hard. The plan is to keep moving, stay ahead of him. You think Marcus is just going to let this go? I asked, standing to face him. You heard what he said. He'll come after us. Let him, Adrian said, his voice low and dangerous. I'm not afraid of him. It's not just you, Adrian, I snapped, my voice rising. It's me he wants to punish, and if he finds us, he'll destroy both of us. Adrian stepped closer, his hands gripping my arms gently but firmly. I won't let that happen. Do you hear me? I'll protect you, Evelyn, no matter what. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that we could outrun Marcus, that we could build a life together, far from the wreckage we'd left behind. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Marcus wasn't the kind of man to let go of a grudge, especially not one as personal as this. The first sign that Marcus was closing in came 2 days later. We were in a small diner just outside of Denver, eating in tense silence when Adrian's phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, his brow furrowing as he read the screen. It's an unknown number, he said, showing me the message. You can run, but you can't hide forever. My stomach dropped. It's him. Adrian's jaw tightened. Let him play his games. He's not scaring me. But the look in his eyes told a different story. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound outside the motel, the crunch of gravel under tires, the distant hum of a passing car, set my nerves on edge. At some point, I must have dozed off, because I woke to the sound of Adrian's voice, low and urgent. What do you mean you can't help? He was saying. I sat up, my heart pounding, as I watched him pace the room, his phone pressed to his ear. Fine, he said finally, his voice sharp. Then I'll figure it out myself. He ended the call and turned to face me, his expression grim. Who was that? I asked. A friend, he said, running a hand through his hair. I thought he could help us disappear, but he's too scared to get involved. What do we do now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Adrian sat on the edge of the bed, his shoulders slumping. We keep moving. We don't stop until we're so far off the grid that even Marcus can't find us. But for how long? I asked, tears welling in my eyes. Adrian, we can't live like this forever. We don't have a choice, he said, his voice breaking. The breaking point came 3 days later. We were on the road, heading west toward a town Adrian said was small enough to disappear in, when we noticed the car behind us. It had been following us for miles, staying just far enough back to avoid suspicion, but neither of us could ignore the nagging sense that we were being watched. It's him, Adrian said, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Are you sure? I asked, my voice trembling. Adrian didn't answer. Instead, he took the next exit, weaving through side streets in an attempt to lose our tail. But the car stayed with us, its headlights glaring in the rearview mirror. Hold on, Adrian said, his voice tense as he made a sharp turn onto a gravel road. The car behind us hesitated for a moment before following, its tires kicking up dust as it closed the distance between us. Adrian, what are you doing? I asked, panic rising in my chest. I'm ending this, he said, his voice steady. He brought the car to a sudden stop, throwing it into park before stepping out. Stay here, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I watched as he approached the other car, his shoulders squared and his fists clenched. The driver's door opened and Marcus stepped out, his face twisted with rage. You've got some nerve, Marcus said, his voice cold. This ends now, Adrian said, his voice low but firm. Marcus laughed bitterly. You think you can threaten me? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I'm not afraid of you, Adrian said, stepping closer. You should be, Marcus said, pulling a gun from his coat. My breath caught in my throat as I scrambled out of the car, my heart pounding. Marcus, stop, he turned to me, his eyes narrowing. This is your fault, Evelyn. You made this mess. Put the gun down, I said, my voice shaking. Why should I? He asked, his tone mocking. You've already destroyed everything. Why not finish the job? Adrian lunged at him, grabbing for the gun. A shot rang out, echoing through the empty road. For a moment, everything went still. Marcus staggered back, clutching his side as blood seeped through his shirt. Adrian stood frozen, the gun now in his hands, his face pale. I ran to Marcus, my hands shaking as I tried to stop the bleeding. Why? He whispered, his voice weak. Why him? I couldn't answer. Adrian dropped the gun, his chest heaving as he stared at Marcus. He'll live, he said finally, his voice hollow. We have to go, I said, tears streaming down my face. Adrian nodded, pulling me to my feet. We left Marcus there, his blood staining the gravel road as we disappeared into the night. We didn't stop driving until dawn, the weight of what we'd done pressing down on us like a suffocating blanket. This is it, Adrian said as we pulled into a desolate rest stop. This is our life now. I nodded, though the tears in my eyes told a different story. I didn't know where we were going, or if we'd ever truly be free of Marcus's shadow. But as Adrian took my hand, his grip firm and steady, I let myself believe, for the first time in weeks, that we might have a chance. A chance to start over. A chance to rebuild. A chance to be together, no matter the cost.